It is assuredly very strange that these marvelous legends, which have not been copied from the evangelical facts, since they are incontestably more ancient, yet form, when taken together, the real life of the Son of God. Can truth, then, spring from error? What are we to think of these fantastic associations? Shall we say, with the scoffing philosophers of the Voltairean school, and some German visionaries of a somewhat more recent date, that the apostles borrowed these fables from the various creeds of Asia? But without speaking of the jealous care with which they hid the books reputed divine, in the impenetrable darkness of the sanctuary, not to mention the profound horror wherewith the Jews regarded idolatrous legends, and their supreme contempt for foreign learning, how could poor, illiterate men, the extent of whose knowledge was to steer a bark over the waters of Gennesareth, and whose nets were still dripping with its living waters, when they were promoted to the apostleship, how could laborious artisans, forced to toil for their daily bread during the intervals of their preaching, how could such as they have ransacked the sacred books of the Indias, of the Chinese, the Bactrians, the Phoenicians, and the Persians? What appearance is there that Simon Peter, the sons of Zebedee, or the austere disciple of Gamaliel, who boldly said to Corinth, that rich and learned Grecian city, "For myself, I know but one thing, Jesus, and him crucified," that these should have snatched from idolatry, which their mission was to destroy, some of its old tatters to patch upon the life of Jesus Christ, a life so simple and so grand? Still, if the question had only been of loans made from the fabulous legends of nations bordering on Palestine, such as the Egyptians and Phoenicians, however unjust might have been the accusation, it would have had, at least, a show of probability. But no, these brilliant points, which detach themselves from the dark shades of idolatry, to form, like so many little stars, the aureola of the Virgin's Son, come from places the most distant and the least known. Not to speak of that Gaul, whose impenetrable forests hid, at the extremity of Western Europe, its mysterious creed under the shadow of giant oaks, of the great Indies, so imperfectly known in the time of Tiberius, of that Serica of the porcelain towers, whose distant provinces did not tempt even the covetous Romans.
Note, it was under the reign of Augustus that the Roman people received the first ambassador from the Seas, whom we now call Chinese. The ambassadors pretended that it had taken them 3 years to make the journey.
How could the apostles have contrived to communicate with far America, separated from the old continent by her green belt of waves, and lost like the pearl amid the waters? But, granting that the apostles had known, no matter how, these ancient myths, disseminated over all the globe, nay, I will go farther still, and, setting aside native simplicity, the sealed testimony of blood, the high sanctity of these divine men, carried away, as Rousseau says, with zeal for their master's glory, I will suppose that the idea had occurred to them, to embroider some fabulous circumstances on the evangelical tissue, why, the thing would have passed their power. With what face, for instance, could they have attributed to that Herod, whom all Jerusalem had known, whose reign, so glorious and yet so tragical, each one knew by heart, an atrocious and improbable fact, renewed from I know not what king of Persia, who, perhaps, never existed save in the dreams of the Magi? If the massacre of the innocents had been a story fabricated or copied by the apostles, is it to be believed that the Bethlehemites, so likely to know what was passing in the holy city, whose lofty towers darkened their horizon, would not have openly protested against that audacious falsehood, or that those cunning Pharisees, who would fain have confounded Jesus himself, would have let such a story become current without attempting to refute it? Or that the Herodians would have tamely suffered a stain so foul to be falsely imprinted on the fame of a prince, whom they regarded almost as a god, and who had loaded them with wealth and honors?
Note, the flatterers of Herod I, dazzled with the greatness and magnificence of that prince, maintained that he was the Messiah. Hence arose the sect of the Herodians, so often mentioned in the Gospel, and even known to the pagans, since Bossuet and his Scholiast inform us that, from the days of Nero, the birth of King Herod was celebrated by his sectaries with the same solemnity as the Sabbath.
If all were silent, it is because the fact was too well accredited, too public, too recent, to leave any plausible pretense for denial. It is because that, within 2 hours' walk of Jerusalem, were the mothers of the martyrs, who had purchased with their young lives the honor of being born with Christ. It is because that whole towns had seen the glitter of the murderous steel, and heard the wail of death. It is because that, at the first denial given to the Christians, a whole nation would have risen and shouted,
"But we were there." Note, neither Josephus nor the rabbins speak of the massacre of the innocents, says Strauss. Macrobus, who lived in the 4th century, is the only writer who says a word of the massacre decreed by Herod. Strauss is in error. The Toldos, from whom Celsus has taken some of the facts prejudicial to Christianity, which he has interspersed through his writings, do speak positively on the subject, and the fact is in the Talmud. This is the way in which Bossuet answers those who deny the evangelical fact, and never was answer more definitive. Where are those, says he, who, in order to confirm their faith, would wish that the profane historians of that age had mentioned this cruelty of Herod, as well as all the others? Just as though our faith ought to depend on what the negligent or affected policy of worldly historians has made them record or omit in their histories. Far from us be such weak imaginings. Even in a human point of view, the evangelist would have been very careful not to compromise the character of his narrative by recording a fact which was not well authenticated.
So it is with the divine childbearing of Mary, the visit of the shepherds sent by the angels, the glorious resurrection, and, in short, with all the prodigies which marked the coming of Christ. The apostles wrote during the lifetime of those who had figured in the scenes they related, and, even before they consigned these prodigies to writing, they had openly preached them in the very temple of Jehovah, before that immense assemblage of Hebrews from all the provinces, who repaired thither either to offer sacrifice or to bring first fruits, the most dangerous auditory in the world, if they had promulgated falsehood. Far from fearing contradictions, which in case of imposture must needs have followed, Saint Peter speaks to that vast multitude as one sure of the general assent. He boldly appeals to the yet recent remembrance of those who hear him. He asserts the miracles which stamped as divine, the mission of the Son of Mary, and that even before the great council of the nation, which had exerted all its power to have Jesus crucified, and the senators of Israel, frightened and furious, caused Saint Peter and Saint John to be beaten with rods, in order to make them keep silence. But yet they deny not, as the Talmud shows, those prodigies which they stupidly attribute to magic. Thus it is that they say not to the apostles brought before them by the guards of the temple, "Ye are liars or visionaries," they only tell them, with an agitation which plainly indicates their secret fears, "Be silent. Will ye that we be stoned by the people?" Whereupon those 2 men, simple in heart, but great in soul, made answer, "We cannot be silent. God commands us to speak, and him must we obey rather than men." Imposture is not so bold or confident. After having examined the acts, the character, and the position of the apostles, every impartial mind will be forced to admit that they were neither deceiving nor deceived, and that they have nothing to do with the analogies remarked between the evangelical facts and the traditions, more or less fabulous, of the ancient nations. But, then, how to explain these analogies? Is it a mere game of chance, a lucky coincidence? No, it is not by chance that the mystery of the incarnation of a God, in the womb of a virgin, is one of the fundamental doctrines of Asia. It is not by chance that the privileged women, who bear in their womb that emanation of the divinity, are always chaste, beautiful, and holy, that they have glorious and mysterious names, which signify, in all these ancient tongues, expected beauty, immaculate virgin, faithful virgin, delight of mankind, polar star, and that they are all so much alike, that one would say they were molded on a far-off type, hidden from us by the darkness of time. Finally, it is not by chance that a luminous ray unites the divine and human nature. These traditions, wherein the stamp of a primitive time is so plainly visible, evidently ascend to the birth of the world. The antediluvian patriarchs, that chain of old men who lived the age of cedars, wishing to form for themselves an idea of the woman blessed amongst all others, whose miraculous maternity was to save mankind, represented her to themselves under the likeness of Eve before her fall. They gave her a majestic and saintly beauty, which could awake in the minds of men no other feeling, save that of religious veneration. They made her a mild and veiled star, whose dawn was to precede that of the Sun of Justice.